Hey, real quick before we start the podcast, if you have listened to more than one episode, can you do me a favor and rate and review the show? Now, I'm not big on asking for favors, but we really want to get this podcast listed in the top of all health and fitness podcasts, not just the fitness category. This will take you less than a minute, and if you could do that, that would make us friends forever. And since we refuse all sponsors on the show, this will be my only ask rather than telling you to go check out some supplement or product we don't actually believe in, like every other podcast out there. So please rate and review. Okay, that's it. To the podcast. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Jerred Moon here from Garage Gym Athlete Podcast. Graham Desert here again, back on the podcast. Man, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, man. It's an honor to be here. Yeah, I'm honored to be here. I'm glad to be back on the show. I think we have a lot to talk about today.
Yeah. So if you're not familiar, anyone listening, we had Graham on. It's been a while now. It's been a minute. So the reason we got linked up, it was mutual friend, but the big thing between us. So I thought I was all hardcore, doing Murph once a week, did it for a couple years in a row. And then I hear about this guy who's like, that's cool, but like I do it every single day. And you did it every day for a year. So we already had that interview. So we don't have to like hash it out, but I just think people have to know because since the last time we've talked, a lot of new listeners, a lot of things have happened, man. But Graham did Murph every day, 365 days. If we could just dive into that just for a minute or two, some of your biggest takeaways from such a crazy challenge, physically, mentally, anything. Let's just dive straight into that, and then we'll get some updates about, where you've been since then.
Awesome. Yeah, we're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of actually completing that Murph 365 challenge, and people have asked me like, what number one, why'd you do it? Number two, what were some of the big things that you took away, and then how has that impacted your life now? So here we are, almost 2 years later, and it's very simple. The reason why I did it is I wanted more discipline in my life. I know it sounds kind of funny and cliche. That's a lot of like the same reasons why everybody accepts a challenge and wants to dive into a challenge is the reason why I did. I wanted to change some of my routines. There were some things that I didn't like that were going on in my life. I wanted more discipline. And what I found is when I go through challenges like that, it's like everything else starts to up level around me. you know my relationships, my business, all that kind of stuff, things just start to up level. So I wanted to get back into that. I'm no stranger to challenges. I've been there before. I know what it's like. I know it's difficult. I know the feeling of being physically exhausted and all that kind of stuff. So it was something that scared me to begin with, and once I got into it, man, it was something else. The first month was probably the hardest, physically and mentally. But once I got past that, uh, it just became a routine. Became like a warm up per se. And I know that sounds funny, but what the amazing thing about the human body is, repetition is the mother of all skill until it becomes conditioned, then it becomes automatic. And so, you do something every single day, it just becomes automatic to you. And so the Murph became automatic, about halfway through. It was like it became a warm up, and I didn't really actually start sweating until, round, 11 or 12. It would be like more than halfway through the Murph, I would start to sweat. So that was one thing that I learned. The human body really is capable of absorbing what we put it through. So that was one thing. Another thing that I learned is that, we're all very busy. We have, families, we have, work life, we have personal life. We all have different challenges and circumstances and environments that we're dealing with. And, there's all kinds of excuses that we can make for, not working out or not exercising or not writing that book or writing that song or learning that language or whatever you're trying to do. But really doing a Murph, it's like an hour block, and so I set aside an hour block every single day for an entire year for something that I was committed to. And so now I can do that same thing with anything I decide to put my mind to. Anything I decide to commit to, I can take that block of time. So those are probably the biggest things that I learned out of that challenge.
No, I think that's so phenomenal, and I think that's a big reason you're talking about everything else up leveling, like in for people listening, like you don't have to do Murph 365 days in a row, but like I think just signing up for an event, like I'm going to do this marathon, like once you actually like set something on the calendar and then you have to reverse engineer getting there, it changes a lot of things. And sometimes even if the event is small, it makes you lock things into place, like what you're saying, like in relationships, like everything just gets a little bit more organized. And I feel like people miss out on that sometimes. They think that it's just this physical portion of it, but there's so much more that it can do for your psyche. And I think that you did it for such a long period of time is awesome. And then a second thing, I don't think we talked about this as much, but I see people doing crazy challenges. But sometimes when I see it, I'm like, well, yeah, that dude's 22 years old. Like we'll see where it goes. Like, I mean, at the age of completing it, or I think you were 40. Is that right?
Yeah, I was 40 at the time.
Yeah, I mean, just incredible. Like it's just like the excuse killer for anybody else out there who's like, because I see it, and I'm even, I start to think those things too. I'm like, oh yeah, whatever. That guy's 22 doing that thing. And those are excuses, right? Those are made up excuses in my head. But you legitimately, there's nothing. It's like, yeah, 40 years old, knocking it out, no excuses. I think that's probably the best part of it, to be honest. And I think something our listeners will really resonate with. It's awesome. So, I mean, life after that, man. How have things been? Let's just say coming down from that, and like what's training look like recently, in recent history? How's that been?
Well, it's interesting because I've built such a capacity for my body has built such a
Yeah.
capacity to handle a high volume of work, and so that's what my body craves. Long distance running and high repetitions. And what I mean by high repetitions, I mean when you're doing a Murph, there's 600 repetitions that you're doing with weight, and so my body wants that. And so I've just been doing not long distance like 10 miles, 12 miles, 15 miles, but anywhere between 2 to 5 miles plus some sort of a functional workout. And that 2 to 5 miles could also substitute for 30 minutes of rowing, like row machine work or assault bike work, or the bike erg or swimming or some sort of endurance training. Like my body craves that. And I don't do a ton of barbell work. I do a lot of if I do barbells, it's extremely light, you know
Yeah.
deadlifts nothing more than 225.
Any
But
reason for that? Like, you just trying to stay away from injury? Like, well, you just not. I mean, I've actually, to be honest, I've kind of gravitated towards the same thing. Just curious why you're personally staying away from anything heavy.
well, is there any reason why I'm going to be lifting 3 to 500 pounds the next 50 years of my life?
Right. Yeah.
Like I'm more apt to lift 40, 50 pounds,
Yeah.
And what's interesting is we actually moved from Carlsbad to Escondido. My family did. So I live in California, Southern California, in the San Diego County area, and it was a full day of moving boxes, and it was like no sweat. I was like, I could do this all like literally all day long, and I enjoyed it. It was a good workout. But that kind of stuff, like, you know, I did a lot of CrossFit, competed in CrossFit a little bit. Did a lot of the Invictus competition training. Went to the gym downtown and trained with a lot of the competition athletes, and really enjoyed that. But after a year and a half of it, I gravitated more towards endurance training, you
Yeah.
know, and high repetition.
That's to be honest, I'm in a similar spot. And one conversation I've been having with athletes is like, is there a strong enough? And I think there absolutely is. Like there there is a strong enough. The only people who might argue that are like power lifters going for like this extreme stuff, but we all know they're not the healthiest of humans.
Mhm.
Walking around. So I think that's awesome to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, and longevity. I mean, your heart has to support the weight on your body, whether it's muscle or fat.
Yeah.
And so I mean, my goal is longevity, 90 years old, 100 years old, whatever it is, longevity. And lifting heavy weight, actually, it feels good. Deadlifting heavy weight, if I was going to do it, would be deadlifting. But taking care of my back and everything else, I just don't really do the Olympic weightlifting like I used to.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. That's good to hear. Well, let's get into what you have going on with Sparta 300, 235 miles on foot, 12 days, 20 people. Um, just looks awesome. Um, and so we can start one of two ways. I think the why behind it is probably the most important. And then we can kind of get into the details of exactly what you're doing, unless you think that it should be flipped. But if you're cool with it, I'd love to get into, you know, why Sparta 300 and what you're doing there.
Well, I think it's great to start with why. So the reason why I did it is number one, it scared me. I mean, at the time in 2016 when I was invited to go, I was invited by this retired SEAL, and he's like, Graham, you got it. Like, I want to invite you to this. I think you got what it takes. Da 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 da. And like, man, I don't know. But it was very intriguing, and the things that scare you are usually the things that like you need to look
Yeah.
into a little bit. Maybe you don't have to do every single thing that scares you, but if you like challenges and there's one that comes up that you're like, whoa, look into it. So I looked into it. I had not run a marathon before in my life, and I was intrigued by it. I decided to do it. But long story short, to just set that aside and really get to the why. The reason why I'm doing it again and I want to continue to do this is because of the transformation that it had in my life. And I didn't really realize it until years down the road. You reflect back on it, and I'm like, wait a second, you know, that was a very historic event that happened. We were the first group in the history of the world to retrace the steps of those warriors. What they did actually changed the course of history. And the mentality that I had when I did it, the mentality that I had, there were things that were going on personally in my family, and so it was like a trek to quote unquote save my family,
Mm.
save my marriage. And so in that same vein, those men that went and cut off the Persians were saving their nation. They were going on a mission to save their nation. And so if you think about it, if you know the history of what happened, they came into Greece and they went to Sparta and they had a basically a proposal. You can continue to live the life that you're living. You just have to call me king. And so there's an enemy of our life that does the same exact thing. And it's the force of average. It's the force of good, right? Versus great. And so that enemy comes into our life and gets us to settle for the average and the good when we know that there's something more exceptional and excellent that we're called to. And so this is a call to arms to men and women to go to war and stand up against the average and the good things, because a lot of times you may think you're living the way that you're supposed to and you're going down the path you're supposed to, but you're living the comfortable life that is good, but there's something better on the other side. And so this is a call to arms to, you know go to war against that, stand up to it. And so um, I didn't really realize that until I went through some personal things over the last 2 years with my own business failing. When you have a business that fails, I'm 42 years old now. When you have a business that fails and you literally lose, we didn't necessarily lose our house, but it's because we're renting, but it's like you lose your retirement, you lose all the things that you worked hard for and you're starting over, it makes you question the path that you need to go down. And so I went back through an exercise called life mapping to understand, all my successes and failures. When I was in Greece, the first time I went and did Sparta 300, every single day that I was there, I reflected on a key person in my life. My mom and my dad, my wife, and my 5 kids. And so I started to go through all the successes and failures that I had from my first memories as a kid, from like I don't know 3 years old all the way up through that point in time. And I started to reflect on what have I done with my life. And if you really think about it, I'm sure the 300 men that went to go cut off the Persians, they knew they weren't going back. This was a suicide mission. This was a mission that they knew they weren't going to survive. So it's like putting yourself in that position. I'm going on a mission right now. I may not come back, but what have I done with my life? And so that's one of the reason why I want to do this and why this is even a thing is because there's more. It had such an impact on my life in such an epic way that I know it could do the same for others.
And I think that's incredible. And if we had to like pull the thread here on just let's just say you like there is a lot to uncover about ourselves through these physical challenges, right? And you're saying you don't really know until you go do it. Um, if someone's looking to, it doesn't have to be the Sparta 300, but like or Murph 365 days in a year, but like, what do you recommend people do to get a taste of what you're talking about? Because I feel like some people just haven't even, you know, been there. I haven't done these challenges, but I've done a lot of events. I've done a lot of races, long stuff, and I know what you're talking about. Like I know like what you can uncover and how that can get to an emotional level. But how would you recommend people like take steps into this? Because I think that there's so much more than yeah, I got a really low resting heart rate and I crushed it in this amount of time. That's like most of the time, and that's what I tell people all the time. Like, I'm rarely ever going into any of these things like looking to perform. I'm looking to like discover.
Mhm.
That's what I'm looking for. So, how would you recommend people, start to peel this onion if they're looking to get involved and learn more about themselves?
Uh, great, great question. So there's a couple things. There's a couple exercises you can do, and one of them is called life mapping. I alluded to it earlier, but essentially, what life mapping is it's literally sitting down and going through all of your peaks and valleys. All the peak seasons of your life, all the valleys of your life, all the successes and all the failures, and really as you go through that, there's so much revelation, so many things you'll start to reflect on. Key people that were there in those moments that stood by you thick and thin, right? And people you just didn't even think of. It didn't even cross your mind. People that actually you shouldn't be hanging out with anymore. You're like, oh, right, that person was there when this happened and this happened and this happened. Maybe I shouldn't maybe I shouldn't be with them, or whatever. So relationally it'll tell you a lot about people. And then the other thing is it'll give you an idea as far as how you handle challenges too, because one of the key questions you ask yourself is, okay, well, what challenge did I face in that moment of failure? What challenge did I face and work through in that moment of success? So you'll start to see different things that you've worked through or did not work through and understand where your sticking points are in your resiliency, you know, which is really important. A lot of times we think we're resilient, but we're really not. or
Right.
we may think we have a high threshold, but maybe our threshold is down like a couple notches, than what we thought. So it's really looking in the mirror, a real honest, true look in the mirror at what's been going on in your life. And you're also going to, when you think about it from mindset and thought patterns, don't trust what people tell you, don't trust what people do, trust people's patterns, what they repeatedly do. That's one of the things I learned in Murph. I started studying the mind a little bit and the brain, reading books and, neuroscientists and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, well, now I start to understand, the human mind and the body a little bit more, and the power of repetition. And so, we develop these patterns and these habits, and so you can trust people's patterns. So you need to understand what your patterns are, look in the mirror and understand the patterns that led to your successes, because those are the ones that you want to keep doing, and maybe those patterns that led to your successes aren't really healthy patterns that you need. It's kind of a blinder, and something that you need to quit, and develop a healthy pattern, a healthy thought pattern, or a healthy mindset that will help you, get to even a higher level. So uh, that's one thing that I would recommend diving into. It's a great exercise. I started going through it, and then that's when I realized, okay, Sport of 300 actually is something that needs to be done again. Um, so that's one. The other one that I would recommend is you can start to do some reflection and journaling. There may be something that you have revelation around. When you're doing these challenges or events, you're like, whoa, I just discovered this. Okay, well, I'm in the middle of this event. I don't really have time to go through and go get deeper on it. But I want to take it through a drive, or take it for a drive. And that's what I call, that's a tool that I use, is called driving, and DRIV. And D stands for deep thought, which is like you meditate on it. R stands for reflection, which is like journaling. you know I stands for imagination, which means you can take this thought or this mindset and put it into a picture, put it into a song, write a story about it, whatever it is. Use your imagination around that. And then V is visualization. So that's another tool that you can use. The deep thought is something that I like to use that a lot. I do a lot of writing.
Yeah. I think, man, I feel like it's getting so lost. Like everything you're talking about, and I'm so glad that you're on the podcast right now. Like attention spans seem to be getting smaller, and the ability for people to sit and think deeply, like it is just vanishing. And I feel like it's gotten to the point where I even notice it in loved ones, like and friends and stuff. Like there's just that that's gone in a lot of people. It's harder to find the friends and forge the relationships where people are like okay with doing those kind of things, and getting really looking deeply at things that have happened in the past, or being introspective and diving into things a lot more. And I just think it's so important. I think it's so important. I know even when I've lost the habit of journaling, like I've gone back and forth with it, and so much I'm just a better version of myself when I'm doing it. I feel
Mhm.
like I understand things differently. I'm not just reacting to life. Like it's such a helpful practice. And I think that, how you're breaking it down is perfect. Um, and I was wondering, when you're going through the events, like long distance, Murph, whatever, do you typically, because you mentioned like, hey, maybe I don't have time to go through this right now, but like, are you a music guy? Do you try and focus on something else when you're going through like tough physical challenges? You mentioned like each day of the first time you did it, you tried to think of like a certain person. What do you do in those kind of events? Like where does your brain go?
Well, it varies. There's times where, I've got music on. There's times when I'm listening to a podcast. There's times when I'm listening to a book. Um, you know, I think Tim Grover's book, Relentless, I've
Hmm.
listened to that probably about 10 times now.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah, it's a great one. let's see, certain podcasts I'll listen to, and sometimes it's just quiet, just 100% quiet. Because the issue is, and you started to get to that, is there's such a grab for our attention.
Yeah.
And these media companies, whether it's YouTube or Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or whatever it is, they're grabbing for your attention. They have KPIs, key performance indicators, for how long people actually are engaged in the content. And so what do you think they're trying to do? They're trying to get you to pay attention to what they're selling versus what you're doing. So there's actually there's a battle for your attention. And so people walk around preoccupied all the time, preoccupied, thinking about this and thinking about that, five different things going on in their mind. The problem is that our mind doesn't truly function well when we're preoccupied with all these things. And so I know we're like going off over here, but it all ties together. Because when you do a long challenge like Sparta 300, this is an 8-day challenge. This is an 8-day physical endurance challenge. So it's long, and it requires your full attention. Go
Yeah.
ahead. So it requires your full attention. And it's that in itself, like that right there, something requiring your full attention is a challenge in itself.
Well, let's get into the event. I do, like, I'm in complete agreement. Like, I think that this all relates, and that's, I mean, you mentioned, big part of fitness, like not lifting heavy. Like, we're doing longevity is the focus, and I feel the same way. And then also, I feel like physical culture in general is a great way to just learn more about yourself and who you are. And then when we start flooding it with everything else, watching TikTok or reels in between sets, like we're just starting to lose that, and it's not as good. And I think that there's a purpose for physical training that's just as much mental as it is anything else. But let's get into, you know, kind of this year, right? Like, so you have this coming up. Like, what does your year look like for hitting Sparta 300 again?
Well, we're doing it in May, and so um, the application deadline is the end of February. It's going to require at least 3 months of training, if not four. So when I did it, I think it was 4 months of training, which I think is ideal. You can do it with three, but four is really optimal. So if this is something that you're like, well, what is it? I want more information. I want more. Tell me more, whatever. There's an application process. We can't just have anybody that signs up and pays the fee, like, just come to this trip. This has to be, someone who's willing to train. So it starts in May. We're going to be doing it the second half of May, which basically means right after Mother's Day. Plan on getting on a plane. Need to have a valid passport, um, pass a physical, and be ready to train. So that's what I guess you could say the rest of the year looks like.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And you don't have to give away like full training plans or programs or anything, but to prep for an event like this, like what does a training schedule of 3 to 4 months look like? In maybe like bigger chunks.
You're going to be running every week.
Yeah, putting in a lot of miles.
Yeah, putting in miles every week. When I did it, I did a mix of like hill sprints. I did a mix of track work, interval training, heart rate training, stuff like that. So that's pretty much what you can expect. There'll be a community, an online community that you'll be a part of. So there's accountability. We'll be meeting once a month as well, and we'll have weekly and biweekly calls for certain things, as well as some help with some professionals. We have some professional, what you call PT, physical therapy people that
Yeah.
are that typically work with CrossFit and endurance athletes, that will be helping as we go through training. Because your body starts to change, and you know you have different aches and pains to work through.
Yeah, was there anything major, any trouble you ran into the first time you did it?
No, I mean, I had, I'm trying to think. I mean, I had, yeah, I mean, nothing major. I had a tweak on my, somewhere on my body at one point, and instead of running, I used a bike. I used like a bike erg or assault bike or whatever. So I logged, double the miles on a bike versus on foot. So it really wasn't too terrible.
No,
So
that's
yeah,
walking away unscathed, in my opinion. That's
yeah.
anytime that the training volume goes up and it's just a minor tweak. That's awesome. Um, cool, man. I mean, it sounds amazing. I think a lot of what we talked about, like the mental side of this, is the biggest reason someone should be interested. Was there anything else you think people should know?
Yeah, so essentially, what Sparta 300 is we're retracing the steps of King Leonidas and the 300 Spartans, and so we would fly into Athens. We have some group meetings and some training and things like that we would do in Athens for the first day and a half. Then we would drive down to Sparta, stay the night there, and then the next day we would kick off and do the first leg. And so every night or every day we're doing, it's roughly a marathon a day for 8 days on foot. So if you choose to run that, you can run whatever you want. You can walk it, whatever you choose. I did a mix. I ran most of it, but the first couple days, I walked just to get my feet wet, so to speak, and get
Right. Yeah.
warmed up. And then every day after that was running. And so, um, we're going to be staying in local hotels in the Greek countryside, eating the local food, and there's development and personal development and mindset growth and meetings that we have along the way to help guide you along. We'll also have a athletic trainer that'll be with us to help care. You know, I mean, we had, you can end up getting your ankles taped. You might get some KT tape on your calves or your shins or whatever it is. Tweaks, and so you get stretched out and get taken care of by the athletic trainer. We'll have doctors, on call, things like that. So it was very well done, pretty well organized. So, something I'm 100% looking forward to.
Sounds awesome, man. I think it'll be incredible. Might have to do a follow-up podcast post May and just see how it all went and what revelations, if any, and then just overall how it went. I think that'd be awesome. Um, are you cool if we hit some quick fire questions to round out the show?
Sure, let's do it.
Awesome, man. What's the hardest workout you've ever done?
Oh my gosh, the hardest workout I ever did was part of the Invictus competition training, and I remember my heart rate got so high, I had to
Mhm.
like. I mean, I finished the workout, but at the end, it was just like laying down, passed out, and I ended up getting cramps, and like literally one of the athletes was gracious enough to give me some electrolytes.
Nice.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, but it involved an assault bike and like assault bike sprints, and I believe um, was there? I believe there were muscle ups. So it was assault bike muscle ups and for sure burpees. I remember that. But
And you throw a salt bike, it's bad enough. And then you add burpees, like you're
dude,
pretty much there.
yeah,
You say thrusters, and then it's just
yeah,
like it's
and
over.
And I know exactly. I literally think there was a barbell involved. I don't know if it was thrusters or not, but dude, there was a barbell involved.
Yeah, it's a high metabolic demand. That's a rough one. Uh, man. All right. So, in your opinion, what's the best activity for building mental toughness?
Mental toughness, best activity. I would say underwater breath holds.
Okay, that's a good one. I've not caught that one. Why do you think that builds mental toughness?
Because you can actually hold your breath longer than what you think.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's one thing
yeah.
I've learned as well. Like I read that book. What is the art of breath or the one by James Nestor. Anyway,
Oh yeah, I haven't read that one.
yeah, when he basically was talking about, um, the only reason you need to breathe is like you're having the carbon dioxide build up, and so your brain is like sending off these like alarms, like, "Hey, let's do it," just because there's more carbon dioxide in your blood, but it doesn't actually mean that you need to breathe. It's just you have to suppress. I mean, eventually it means you need to breathe. I don't want to
Yeah,
like get anybody in a bad spot. It's just like what you're saying. You can go a little bit longer, maybe try outside the pool if before you start going underwater or whatever, but you can go a little bit longer if you can just start to control that chatter in your brain and try and fight back against that, like, very primal lizard brain instinct. But yeah, I think that can build a lot of mental toughness. All right, man, if you could only have one piece of equipment to train with for the rest of your life, what would it be?
ooh, man, I'm stuck between a kettlebell and a pair of shoes, or maybe even a weight vest, but like one of those three things: a
Yeah,
kettlebell, a weight vest, and a pair of shoes.
I think those are on my short list for sure. I think I'm just loving. I hurt my back last year, and so like I've just been all about the kettlebell for a while now. Just trying to get as much of it in as I can. All right, man. And this is a question we've asked a lot over the years across different shows, even. But the best advice you have for becoming a better human, and this is 100% open ended. But kind of as we alluded to earlier, it's all about this is all connected, right? Like that's why we're all here. So like, what's your best advice for somebody looking to better themselves?
I think the best advice that I have is understand that your thinking, your thoughts are actual, like real things, and that your thoughts actually take up mental real estate and take up physical space in your brain. And so if you and actually it changes like everything within your body and your makeup. So I think it's really important to understand and be aware of what's going on in your mind and your thinking as things go on. I mean, we have 12 to 60,000 conscious thoughts a day, which is a
Easy.
lot. Even more, activity, subconsciously, like billions of, bits of information and activity happens every single day. And so it's like, if we can if we can take those thoughts captive and understand where they came from, and double down on the ones that serve us and delete the ones that don't, we'll be one step closer to being that better human. The things that we think, the words that we speak, the things that we do either bring us closer to our goals, our vision, or whatever we're trying to accomplish, or it takes us further away.
I think
So I
that's
think taking your
incredible.
thoughts captive is the number one thing.
Yeah, and as we kind of talked about, it's getting harder and harder, but you got to fight for it. Um, so for everybody listening, where can people interact with you more? Maybe learn more about Sparta 300, places you want to direct them, send them if they want to check out more, learn more about you.
Well, I think in the show notes we'll just make sure that the brochure and everything's available for people in the show notes. You can find me on all the social media channels: Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram's probably the bigger one. I'm pretty easy to find. You know, Graham Desert, spell like dessert, and you know you'll be able to find my social media channels. Um, but I think that's probably the biggest thing.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for coming on the show, and we'll have to catch up again in May.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Athlete Podcast. If you want to learn more, go to garagegymathlete.com. You can learn about our training. Let us send you a copy of our book, The Garage Gym Athlete, or you can even get featured on the Garage Gym Athlete podcast. Thanks for listening.